Hello, and thanks for joining the session. It's been a little while since we've done a live session here, so hopefully things are going to go all right. Looks like Oliver's online. Thanks for joining, Oliver. I don't have a good way to communicate to people on YouTube right now, but good that you're joining. All right, so what we're going to do is continue off from where we left. So I'm going to take a look at our last commit, implementing DB message from session 2. And so we kind of got far-ish. We have a test command that we're actually executing from the console that just makes sure that we wire things. So I think the first thing we'll do is rerun that just to make sure that it actually works. We are using a DB message repository. That's actually where we started our implementation. We have a event table. One of the big differences in the way that we're planning on implementing the message repository is that I kind of want like I've seen Marco Pavetta call this like a data lake. Essentially, it's going to be one great big table that has all of the events for all of the types. I actually talked to Frank, the creator of EventSauce, about how I can get this aggregate root type. So I think that's what we're going to take a look at today. This is the only thing that I think we need to add that isn't automatically available from the existing implementations. The actual message repository isn't doing anything, so this is where we actually have to do something with it, but this gives us a way to see what would have been persisted, just so that we can kind of poke around and see what it's doing. We do have some sample events that we've created that just sort of give us something that we can start with. So let's go ahead and run the command and see if we can get that running. So let's do PHP artisan import. Oop. Let's see, it might not have been import. What was it? Maybe wiring. That's what it was. So we want to test the wiring. Okay, so what we get from here is we can see that first item is actually the item that we have, and then we can see that the messages to be persisted are, let's see, where's this? The imported message. This is where I got the import command. It was actually wiring. So here we can see everything's coming in. The part that is missing, and the thing that we're going to have to look around a little bit at, is these headers. So these headers don't actually include the aggregate root type. So we're going to need to find a way to make sure that we get those. We do have the aggregate root version, which is great, and we have the event type, which is great, but what we don't have is that this was a Stalker model catalog item. So we don't know what type of event these events are for. Let's see here. All right. So one of the things that I discovered on the last episode is that the bot has some issues occasionally. So I need to double check those to make sure that it keeps running in case I start missing some chat messages. All right, so let's go ahead and dive back into the code. So let's pull this up. Right here is where we are creating our EventSauce catalog. So we're providing an aggregate root repository. And we're creating the DB message repository here and constructing aggregate root repository is the actual thing that we're using from behind the scenes. If we look at the constructor args, what we see is that there's a dispatcher that is null and there's a decorator. Let's double click in here and see what happens, because I think this is where, yeah. So what we have here is getting a new synchronous message dispatcher. I'm not exactly sure how that's used, so I'm not going to go into that right now. But what I do know is that this default headers decorator is actually what we need to replace. I only know this because this was something that I asked Frank about when I was at Laracon EU. He was nice enough to sit down with me and actually answer some questions. So this default headers decorator is the thing that decorates the message. So this is where it takes the message, it gets the instance type of the event itself and records that as the header event type. And then the time of recording is also there as well. So if we look at this information that comes from the headers, we can see event type, and we can see the time of recording. So what we also get is aggregate root ID and aggregate root version. Hey Joe, welcome. So this underscore naming convention, let's see where that comes from. Let's see if there's more of those. Aggregate root ID, aggregate root ID type, we don't really need that. So there's nothing in here that gives us what we're looking for. So we're gonna have to build our own convention, which I think is probably gonna be totally fine. So let's go ahead and say app service provider. So we need to pass null for the dispatcher. Hi Frank, thanks for joining. Hopefully I continue to do EventSauce justice on this. So I'm going to just pass in null for the dispatcher because it looks like it's going to handle that just fine. It's going to use the default. And then we're going to have to create a new, let's see, what's it called? A new header decorator. Let's see if that's actually implements message decorator. All right, so we're gonna have to create a message decorator. Rather than actually create a class for it, I'm gonna try to do something I haven't done a lot just because I like doing new things in front of people when it's scary. I'm gonna see if I can do an anonymous class just for now. So let's do new class implements. And this is one of the nice things about the way that Laravel's container works with PHP as the construction language, is that you can do all sorts of fun stuff that you wouldn't be able to do otherwise. Like with Symfony's container, you'd pretty much have to create a class. Here we don't have to do that just yet. So we're going to implement message decorator. Let's see here. Implement methods, decorate. Why is this compatible? You know, I think we ran into that issue somewhere else where it was complaining about these. So I'm not going to do anything with that just yet. Let's see, I want to see how this works. So return message with headers. So I'm going to copy this implementation and we're just going to add something else. So Frank just wrote into chat, insider tip, the default header decorator is needed at least. If you want extra headers, combine them by composing them into a message dispatcher chain instance. Okay, so what I was going to do is just paste these in. What Frank is saying to do is do this the right way and use the decorator chain. I'm remembering now that is what he had mentioned. So what I'm going to do instead is do new message decorator chain, which is what he was suggesting. And then this takes a list of processors. So let's do new header, default header decorator. And let's just run it like this and see if it still works. This conversation is coming back to me again. So, all right, so this still seems to be working. Let's see what we can do now. Let's add another. We would do that here. And let's do message with headers. And let's just, for fun, say Astrocasts true. And this will be enough for me to know whether or not this is even doing what we need to do. Pasting them, okay, so Frank says pasting into other stuff is fine, but you have to keep it up to date. Yeah, so this is definitely the right way to do it. I forgot that there was a decorator chain. That definitely is helpful when developers provide that sort of thing. So let's run this again and see if it's working as expected. What I would expect to see here is without the underscores, I should see Astrocasts true. Oh, something failed. Anonymous, decorate. So you know what? I would have expected it would have just brought this in, but I guess it didn't. That's odd. Usually when I implement something like this, it brings everything in like it's supposed to. I wonder if that's a bug with the way that PHP Storm handles the anonymous classes, but let's see if it works now. Okay, cool. So this is exactly what we'd expect. We see 1 instead of true, but it is more or less what we were needing to do. So let's see. The other thing that the header decorator did was it took class inflector, because I think we want that. Actually, let's see what we have on message. So in here, aggregate root ID. Well, Frank's on here, so hopefully he can help. Where I still don't see the aggregate root. I can get the event, but at this point I don't. Oh, I remember. We would get it up here. Yeah, okay. I just know what it is. So let's see if that works. So let's do with headers. That's just catalog. Astrocast true. Let's do aggregate type. I think that would fit the naming scheme. So we have event type, aggregate root. I'll do aggregate root type. Yeah, okay, so Frank says this is what we should do. However, I'm not getting to use the inflector here, so let's see what happens when I do this. Okay, so we have aggregate root type, and we can see that it's not listed nicely like the event type is. So we're going to have to get the inflector, which we can get from the container. Let's see, does container work here? New class. Can I do that? Class name inflector. I'm guessing, yeah, okay, so I'll ask for this just in case. Does that work? No. Method call uses 1 parameter, message uses 2. So I need to implement the constructor. And let's take an inflector. Getting better at this shortcut. Let's see if we can do this. Ooh. There we go, initialize fields. Seems to be very picky about when it picks that up and when not. So now I should be able to class name inflector. So there's probably a different way I could have done this. I could actually probably do this once. Let's see if this just works first. What do I get to do? Class name to string, class name to type. There we go. As long as this does what we expect, then yeah. So that's class name inflector. Tree not found. All right, so I see. So it isn't actually bound, it's just doing the default. So let's just do that here. So we can't actually get the class name inflector, and I'm not going to bother defining this as something that lives in our container. So let's get rid of these. Let's leave the constructor. Let's do this. We'll follow the same pattern. Let me get that back again then. Equals null, and then we'll do there we go. Create a new one of these. So if we decide to make this better later, we can actually use it. Class name inflector wants a property type. Let's do this. Class name equals, and then we will just call. So we don't want to actually do the inflection every time. It may actually be smart enough to know what's going on there, but in case it's not, let's just go ahead and do it here. Class name to type, item, class, and then here, aggregate root type can just be class name. Let's do aggregate root type. All right, let's see now. Okay, cool. So now we have aggregate root type. It's item. So the whole idea here is that since it's going to be in one database, we want to make sure that we are able to go into the database and ask for everything for item, for example. So right before, we wouldn't be able to do that unless we wanted to do some weird string matching here, that anything for Stalker model catalog, all of those events are related to item or whatever. This way, we'll be able to look for all of the items themselves. Okay, so we do have this little bit, aggregate root version. Okay, so let's see where we're at. We need to be able to create EventSauce catalog. All right, so now that we have this, we actually want to persist these. All right, thanks Frank. It looks like Frank's signing off for the day. I appreciate it. So let's go ahead and see if we can do message serializer. Let's message serialize. All right. Get rid of this. Well, we'll leave that there for now. And let's see what the serialized version. Okay, so this is what the serialized version is going to look like. So this could be stored in our, let's see, create events table. So this is what we would be putting inside the payload. Aggregate root type. One thing that I was thinking about doing potentially was splitting the payload from the message. So the payload from the headers, because essentially I want to look to see what the Doctrine migration implementation looked like. EventSauce. DoctrineMessageRepository. Okay. Message is index. So it does serialize the whole message, which is interesting to me. Does it actually leave it like that? Payload column. So it gets the headers out, but it does actually store the payload Yeah, JSON encodes the payload here. So it is storing the whole thing. Thank you, Elyurt. Appreciate you joining us. Okay, so this is sort of the section of code now that we're going to implement in our implementation. And I think, what did we decide? What are we using for this? Message serializer, JSON encode options. What's connection are we using? This is a Doctrine connection. We could probably just do that, just to save a little bit of time. Let's see here. So let's get a connection and maybe not table name, because let's just say that the table name is fixed. So let's do connection. Oh, you know, we might not actually have Doctrine yet. Composer require. So a bunch of things have happened since the last time we broadcast. Laravel 6 is out, so this project's going to have to be updated to Laravel 6 if I want to keep it current. EventSauce has some new bells and whistles that are being put onto it. Dries is creating a first-class Laravel EventSauce package. So Laravel EventSauce. This is something that he was talking about at Laracon US and Laracon EU. So there are going to be some other things that people can use. There are a lot of helpful things in here. There's like command generation, event generation, automatically creates the migrations. The downside to this, if you want to consider it a downside, is that it's very opinionated. So it's following most of, if I were to guess and describe this in a certain way, it would be that it's following the default EventSauce implementations opinions. So things like what we're doing here, where we're putting everything in the same object or in the same database, isn't there. It's using the default idea of generating the commands and events. I think it's actually using the built-in generators. It's also generating the repositories for you. So it's doing a lot of really cool stuff. So if you just want to get up and running really quickly to play with this, I would say just go for that. What I'm trying to do with mine is actually learning EventSauce and how it works and how it ties everything together, because just one of the things I like to do is actually figure those things out. So that's kind of the difference between what I'm doing, what this package is. But for a lot of people, this might be the right way to actually go about it. All right, looks like we have Doctrine now. So we have Doctrine DBL, which means we should be able to ask for a connection. Connection. And, you know, while we're at it, let's just ask for a table. Table name, just for convenience sake. Initialize fields. Let it do all of that for us. I think my PHP Storm configuration got messed up at some point. There we go. Let's reformat that. Let's head back to the original implementation and see what we can change and what we have to fix. So let's go back here. There we go. All right, so persist does some circuit breaker type thing where if there are no messages, it doesn't do anything. So it returns early, which is good. And then it gets the base SQL. And it took me a little bit to really understand what was going on here. The way that it was creating these. And I think what it's trying to do is to build one great big SQL query. So I'm gonna probably just copy and paste it as is, and then tweak it as things break or not. So base SQL here is what we're gonna get for, it's gonna use our table name, which we're specifying here. Insert into our table that we've created. So let's do a default table name. What did we call it? I think it's just events. So we're going to probably have to change the way we wire this up. So let's go service provider, DB message repository. So this is going to fail because it needs to know what we're doing here. So let's go ahead and when DB message repository wants or needs table name give events. So we can make this configurable later if we need to, but for right now, we don't need anything more than that. Without this, everything's going to break anyway, but without this, I think the container will just crash. Oh, no, not that. Yeah, so unresolvable dependency. It doesn't know how to get... so this is actually complaining about DBL connection, which is a different problem. Laravel DBL connection. This will be interesting because I'm not really sure. Now I'm gonna have to second guess all of this if I can't find this quickly. So let's do Laravel connection wiring. Doctrine. Okay, so we get we have Laravel doctrine. I don't really want that. No, I don't want that. I just need... do I need composer? Okay. What does that doctrine collection? Doctrine connection. Let's see what this looks like. DBL connection as doctrine connection. Connection interface. All right, so oh, this was not the thing I thought I would get stuck on today. Whoa. Let's see here. So this is driver connection. Okay, so I think I can maybe create And so when anything wants a connection from Doctrine, then let's do DB connection. And let's do return new connection. So for parameters, so let's do, what did it say it needed? PDO. I think we can get PDO that way. Let's see what happens if we do that. Driver. This is just whack. Doctrine DBL. Well, that's fine, but I know all that. Upgrade guide. Well, I know it's being used by migrations for anything that does changes. All right, you know what? Let's not worry about this right now. Let's see what else we can do. Let's go back into DB message repository. Let's forget about connection. And let's see if we can do this with the DB helper. All right, so base SQL, we're still getting the base SQL. Let's do print $SQL die. All right, so insert into events, event ID, blah, blah, blah. So we can, Jonathan Jeffrey says, I think you just had the params around the wrong way. If you can type in what you think it should look like, I can definitely try it again. So yeah, if you want to do that, that would be awesome. Now, if I take this default off, I suspect we'll get the container error. Yeah, because it doesn't know how to handle table name. So rather than having this in the table name, what I'm going to do is at least specify this from the outside. So eventually this could come from a configuration variable, but since this is a standalone application, I don't think we need to configure it more than that. But now we're back to having it working. So let's see if we can build the rest. So let's do persist. All right, so what this is doing is building up an array of parameters and values, building up the array of parameters that match to where it is located. See if it works just like this, except for these things, because I know that won't work. There we go. Okay, undefined property, serializer. All right, so it thinks it needs a serializer, so it called it something different than we did. Let's see, so serializer. Ah, there we go, serialized message. So let's do message serializer. Run it again. All right, so let's work through these. Class header not found, so we kind of know what that's about. These are the default headers, so we're going to bring these in from EventSauce. All right, now we have UUID is not a thing, so let's find that. I think it's just using Ramsey UUID. All right, let's see if that works now. Okay, cool. So what it's doing, it's created event ID 0. Since there's only one event, that's all there's going to be. Let's look at and let's do params, just so we can see what we're working with. Okay, so params, we can see the payload is set to the entire message, which itself includes a payload. Event type 0, or the event type is there, and the thing that isn't here that we needed was our aggregate root type. So that hasn't been done in here yet. So let's do aggregate root ID. Let's call this aggregate root type. Root. Event ID. Aggregate root type. So that's on the values, and then we actually have to set it as a parameter as well. So params, get root type column, payload headers. And this is where we're just hard coding these to what we had before. So we're going to do aggregate root type. I think that'll do it. It's possible there's still some other things, but this should hopefully do it for us. All right, so now we have aggregate root type is listed here. Let's see if we can do another event so that we can make this a little more interesting. So let's go to source, events imported. Let's do let's create another event. Instead of calling it imported, let's do rename. And let's see, that was implements serializable event. So that's just using EventSauce, construction. I think this is probably all the same. So we're going to use the same exact thing here. Which means in our wiring command, we can use this now. So let's do item, apply imported. Let's do rename, $string, $new name. Record that, and we can do new rename event with the new name. We can also do a guard here. If new name is equal to name, return. So we don't want to actually generate this event if the name isn't actually changing. So record event, and then we have to apply it. So predicted function, apply, rename. You know what? This needs to be past tense. Totally glossed over that, my bad. So rename is the name of the method, but the event name should be renamed. So apply renamed, renamed event, name. All right, so this should be what we need to do in order to make sure that new names actually get recorded. So we go into our wiring command, what we can do. So we import it, we dump it, and then we save the item. What we can do instead is say item rename second time. And so what we should see is an import event with first time, and then we should see a renamed event with second time. Let's see if that's actually what we get here. We should also get a much larger list of parameters, and this values should be longer as well. And that'll give us a better feel for what it's actually doing there. Okay, cool. So if we look at, before we actually look at that, let's go to here. Let's print our messages. Okay, so print our messages. We'll see the first thing we have is the imported event with first items as the name. So that's the first thing that we're seeing here. If we look at the second one, the second event, we now see a renamed event. So we see renamed with the name of second time. When we come down here, we see the SQL query that gets generated is using the index ID per each collection of these. So we can see this is for the first event, and this is for the second event. And then it's creating a huge list of parameters that uses the same naming conventions. So this one should have first items, and then this is second time. So we're actually building the thing out like we would expect to. So that's working. Oh, that's new. Must have clicked something I didn't mean to. Okay, so we aren't going to use this. I'm just going to punt on this and just use DB directly. So DB, we're going to use the facade. And let's do insert. And we'll see if insert will work with this. So SQL, and then params. All right, so that will just do a bunch of stuff for us. But we really wanted to do this in a transaction. So let's do DB transaction. Use params. We wouldn't have to do it in a closure like this, but I'm just going to do it that way anyway. So we'll make sure that all of this happens within a transaction. So if there's a bunch of things that happen at the same time, it's going to happen right here. So if I close this out and everything works, let's first run our migrations. Nothing to migrate, so I think we already have migrations. Let's open up. What are we using? We're using Postgres, Stalker. All right. Let's run PHP Artisan. Wiring again. Ooh, this is interesting. So we actually get something. Time of recording of relation events does not exist. All right, so at least now we're getting somewhere. Insert into event. there's more mapping here that we need to do. So event type, so we have event ID. We have aggregate root type, aggregate root ID, event type, aggregate root version. Okay. Time of recording. That's the difference. So it's just that we named it differently here. So I'm going to rename it at this point. So let's do time of recording. Replace that with recorded at preserve case. You know, I want into. I think this also needs to be different too, because this is how it's determining the order of things. So event ID, then we have aggregate root type. So let's make sure and put that down here too. Let's move this down. No. These are in a weird order that are different than they are here. Event ID, aggregate root type. So I think we can do this without remigrating. Now what do we have? Time of recording. I need to change that down here too. So. Something new, good. Null value in column, aggregate root ID type. Aggregate root ID type. So that's getting aggregate root ID. Why doesn't that have a type? We're almost done with this. All right, so we have aggregate root type, aggregate root. Doesn't have an aggregate root ID type. Aggregate root version, aggregate root ID. I wonder if this is a bug. Let's look this up a bit, because I think that this might be something that changed. Let's look for we need the main one. So we have source. Is there a header? Here we go. So there is a aggregate root ID type. Let's see where this is used. Constructing message serializer. I bet that we have a different version of this. So if aggregate root ID is an instance of aggregate root ID, then it gives these. Yeah. Okay, so let's look here. The aggregate root ID that we're using is Docker model item ID. Item ID. And it is doing aggregate root ID. So let's see what was it? Constructing aggregate root repository? No, constructing message serializer. Let's see if it's doing this So serialize message. So if the root ID is an instance of aggregate root ID, it should be using the aggregate root ID type and the root ID, but it doesn't seem to be doing that. So it almost seems like it's not actually getting here. So aggregate root ID. Let's see if these are the same. Yeah, they are. But are we using this? Constructing message serializer. Yeah, when the message serializer is used, it should be using that. All right, so this is one of the things I do very rarely is I'm actually going to edit this code. Message headers. All right, let's see. It isn't using this. So what are we using instead? Constructing message serializer. Oh. Does this take a serializer? No. Dispatcher. What happens if I do this? It's not instantiable. Unless my code is dying before it gets there. That could be the case. So let's remove this. All right, change it to a dump. Okay. So it's coming through here. So it is an instance of aggregate root type, aggregate root ID. We can see from right here is an item ID. Afterwards, it should be an ID and a type. Same thing for here. The problem is it's not actually keeping those here. So we know that at this point, the messages contain IDs that are objects. That's totally fine. I think the output we were seeing was at this point. So we were asking to serialize the message. So let's do print. Yeah, so at this point, what we should see for payload is the correct version. Yeah, so payload contains headers. What I think is going on down here, ID, root ID, so we need to add another column. Root ID type. So it wasn't that it wasn't working, it was that we weren't even doing anything with it. Type ID. Let's add that aggregate root type. Root ID column. So just another one of these that wasn't in the default implementation that EventSauce ships with. Root ID type. I mean, we could also decide that we don't need that. But at this point, I think I'm just going to add it. Root ID type column. There we go. And then we put that after aggregate root ID columns. So we need to go back in here. Aggregate root ID, aggregate root ID type. I'll see what happens. Awesome. All right, so if this worked as advertised, what we should expect to see is Astrocasts. We should see something in that events table. And I'm going to pull that up in just a second. Awesome. Looks like it worked. So let's go back here. Wow, that's not what I thought I pressed. There. There we go. And so what we end up with is exactly what we would have expected. So we have event IDs, we have the ID of the actual event store. So this is something that nothing will really use. This is sort of going to be used for, it's not that nothing is going to use them, it doesn't matter to the event sourcing side of things. This will be more for keeping track, position when we have the projections looking. They're going to pay attention to this as the last value that they processed. We have an event type. We actually have the aggregate root type, so we can say, give me all of the events for everything that is a catalog item. We can actually see the aggregate root ID, so we can do a combination of these and say, give me everything for this item for this particular ID. Aggregate root ID type. This one's actually, I don't know if this is actually something that we need to persist. I just thought that it would have worked out of the box, but since we've added it now, I don't think I'm going to remove it, but real world, I'm not sure there's much use for this. And then the aggregate root version, so we can see that the most recent version for this aggregate root with this ID is version 2. And we can also see when it was recorded, and we have access to the full payload. So if we copy this to viewer, I'm just going to go to something here. Let's do format. There we go. So when we consume these, which is probably what we'll take a look at on the next session, what we'll be able to do is essentially rehydrate our object by reading all of these entries and then applying this event. So the renamed event, for example, here, it's going to be able to play that back to the object with the name of second time, and we should be able to get an object at version 2, which is exactly what we'd be expecting. So thank you all for joining. Thanks for joining on chat and chiming in there. Looking forward to getting back to this a little more regularly. Thank you very much.